All right, hello YouTube. Welcome to today's live stream for Wikilection. The topic for today is the discussion tool. We'll just briefly do the intro to the live streams as normal. So these Wikilection live streams, the goal is of course to provide information about Wikilection, while also improving the design and sort of getting better at explaining things as it's presented and as we get feedback from people that watch the videos and participate. We'll be doing sort of, as we go through the weekly live streams, we'll be cycling through different topics, and then we'll be adjusting the topic list based on feedback. So that's both the items that are listed and of course the actual content that we're covering. The basic flow for each topic is that we'll present the topic in the current state. In the actual video, I'll be keeping an eye on comments as well as afterwards, and any other feedback we receive through other channels like Facebook or Patreon will be added to the plans and sort of used to refine them. And then the next time that topic is covered, you would be seeing the updated plans, but based on the feedback received. So let me just scroll down here to the discussion. So as it says here, the following slides are going to show how Wikilection plans to use evidence and expert feedback, where we've already, the previous live streams were about those two topics, evidence and experts, and the feedback that we would be getting from them on the evidence. And that information is going to be used to discuss controversial issues. And so controversial issues, the initial version, we're going to focus on scientific sort of challenges or controversies. The two most obvious ones that come to mind for me are vaccines and climate change. So if we look at the actual breakdown of how we're sort of structuring the conversation, now this image here is a massive oversimplification of what it will end up looking like, but I think it does an okay job of explaining how things break out and sort of gives us some things that we can talk about the different levels. So at the top here, we can see the different stances. And those are the positions taken by the different participants or the different parties in there. So for vaccines, that can obviously be pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine. For climate change, that could be, people that believe in climate change and that it's man-made, people who believe in climate change but don't believe it's being caused by humans, or people that just don't believe in climate change, period. So for the different stances, the idea is instead of just making your stances and sort of having some well-written editorials to back up your stance or your position, a stance instead is just a collection of claims. So for the claims that would back up whatever your stance is, so if we say the claims that you would that would back up your pro-vaccine stance, the idea is that you would then have probably quite a few in something as complex as vaccines, and then each of those claims should be able to have the references to evidence to support those claims. So that might be a certain statistic within a scientific article, or it might actually be the results of the whole scientific report and like the reason for that certain study. And then as it just said, underneath the claims, we'll have the evidence. And the evidence is tracked to be able to support the individual claims made, and then also how the claims are referencing that information, which we'll get to in the next slide. So one of the things shown here is, of course, you can tell this is a very simplistic overview where we're saying the topic stances, you're either for something or you're against it. In the for side, we have two claims that we're showing here, claim A and claim C, and then the against only has the one claim, claim E. Underneath these claims, we can see some underlying evidence, and the colors here are meant to represent the community feedback. So is the claim, is it backed up well, which it all boils down to the articles. So we can see here, there's 3 articles in green. That's meant to be, the community reviewed those and said, yeah, those follow the guidelines for whatever type of evidence that is. And as well, we're really simplifying it and saying that the way that claim A is referencing these articles, it's being done accurately. So it's not just that the evidence itself is good, but also that it's being used properly. So in this example, we're saying there's 5 articles. The letters underneath are the things that article is sort of, like I was saying, the outcome of that article. So in this case, we're saying that Article 1 would sort of back up claims A, B, C, and D, which we don't have articles B and C in here. So it's just backing up articles A and C in reference to these topic stances. You can see, that's claim A is a darker green because it's being supported by Article 1 and 2, which are green, so they're being well reviewed. And it's also being supported by Article 5. That one's kind of a gray. It probably hasn't been reviewed. It might not have enough information for us to really know. You can see claim C is being supported by one article that is being reviewed and has been approved. And then it's also being supported by, again, Article 5 that doesn't have anything. So it's still green, it's still good, but maybe could use a bit more evidence. And finally, we see claim E is showing here in sort of an orange, and that's because it's only references or Article 5, same thing, where again, it's not been well reviewed enough for us to know if this is good or not, but it is being supported by Article 3, which is also being shown in orange, which shows that maybe it's not the best quality. So either the evidence itself, that scientific article, for example, might have some issues that the community found, or it might be that the actual article is fine and that claim E just isn't referencing it accurately. So when we're talking about how to reference the evidence for claims, we're talking about the community needs to review that evidence. And as it said, or as you said in the previous slide, this includes that the evidence itself meets any relevant standards. So for something like a scientific report, you're going to have certain things that the scientific community says, this is what makes a good study, this is what makes maybe a bad or at least a suspect study. And things like journalism and economic reports, that those are going to be different rules. But the idea is to establish a framework on if we're going to trust, let's say, a scientific study, what does that have to have? What do we need to know about it? That type of thing. Now, a good sort of piece of evidence, it should be both high quality evidence. So that's where the community looks at it and says, yes, that piece of evidence, that scientific study that follows the necessary rules, but then also in the way that it's being referenced, it is accurate. And those have to happen at the same time. If we're looking at sort of a bad or maybe less trustworthy form of information, that can be either low quality evidence or it's being inaccurately referenced. If either one of those is the case, then it starts being not as trustworthy. Because if you accurately reference low quality evidence, it's not terribly useful. It can be a report that maybe has some issues that could maybe be redone. It might not say that it's necessarily not true, but it's just, if the goal is to find things as trustworthy as possible, you do want to make sure that the study or the evidence itself meets the necessary criteria. And then as well, you can have inaccurate references. So if the study itself is well done, it meets all the necessary criteria, but you're cherry picking stats, or maybe you don't necessarily understand how something should or shouldn't be used, you can inaccurately reference good content. And both of those cases, the accurately referencing low quality content and inaccurately referencing high quality content, both of those lead to something being less than trustworthy. And if you have low quality evidence being inaccurately referenced, well, that's just not good by any stretch. Comments here. So this will hopefully explain a bit about how the evidence is used, not just sort of one piece at a time showing, that a certain scientific article maybe is or isn't well designed or isn't being referenced honestly. We go back to this previous slide here. You can see now how the individual articles, so this is 5 articles that have been reviewed by the community. You can see that they've sort of said, is the article good? Is it worthwhile? Is it trustworthy? And then as well as it being accurately referenced. And then based on the evidence that these claims are using, you can see here that despite the fact that these 3 claims are probably, or at least claim E is probably saying something fairly different from claim A and C, all of them reference Article 5. And so that is maybe a sign that that might not be the best article. It might, be it might be too vague, or some of these claims might not be accurately referencing it. Not sure there's too much more to cover on this in the current state. I guess some important things are, with how simplified this is, most likely claims will end up being sort of nested claims. So if we go back to the example of vaccines, well, most likely there's going to be a lot of claims under each, but you're going to have different groups of claims. So if you're for vaccines, you might be talking about, the ingredients in those vaccines, and then the studies that prove, how safe and effective they are. You might also have something talking about, what might happen without vaccines, or what do things look like before vaccines, or what are the actual dangers of the diseases that those vaccines help treat or prevent. And you might end up with some high-level claims about, that they're safe and effective, that, certain an X number of lives are saved, or certain diseases were wiped out. And then you would have sort of child claims to those. If you're talking about something being safe and effective for all of the different ingredients, you're going to have a whole collection of underlying claims about each individual ingredient, and then the evidence that supports those. So as we find out, if there's 10 different ingredients listed, they're going to have varying levels of evidence for each. We can start to see where the evidence is actually available for each of them, and the quality of evidence. And that goes both for the claims of, let's say, the pro-vaccine crowd for how safe an ingredient is, and the claims made by the anti-vaccine crowd for how unsafe an ingredient is. So most likely you'll end up with two sides of the same sort of coin, or the same claim, where one side is arguing something is safe, one side is arguing something is unsafe. They're going to be referencing articles, and it's to see which side actually has the community reviewed evidence to help back their claims up. And that is about it for this. And now I've just realized I went through this whole thing and went through the small version of the video with my picture being larger, which was not the intended goal here. And now it's not switching over. Okay, there it is. Let me just quickly flip back here. So we've got a better version of this this graphic. So just to quickly do a recap to help recover from that, at the top we have our topic stances. It's saying for and against. Commonly, you're going to see more than two stances. For something like legislation or a ballot measure where there really just are two choices, yes or no, it might be limited to only two. But for more complex things, there's likely going to be some some area in between the absolutely yes and absolutely no. And some things that might not even, yes and no, might not be valid stances. It's probably going to be more complex. You will see some claims shared between them, right? So if it was for and against and like somewhere in the middle, you might have them pulling from the claims and the evidence that are shared between those two. Where the end goal is to see for the claims that are supporting these different stances, which stance sort of has the best ratio of accurate claims that are supporting their that stance, and then have evidence, and that after the community goes through and reviews all of the evidence, and thus says which claims are, as far as we know right now, the most accurate, which stance has the most good claims and the least, inaccurate or bad claims. Also flip over to this slide because that one was also small, just to sort of show what that was showing over here. So we're saying this shows the evidence quality, if it was the actual scientific study or economic report or whatever content it is it sort of well made? Is it designed using that industry's best practices and sort of the rules for what makes something good and trustworthy? And then you have, if it's low, probably wouldn't trust that content. And then as well, as we talked about, you can reference, high quality evidence if you reference it accurately and how it was intended. That's kind of the sweet spot. And then if you're inaccurately referencing good content, well, that might just be, you didn't understand that a certain stat couldn't be used in a certain way, or in some cases it's less innocent, and a lot of the sources of misinformation that we're seeing is you take something that is good and trustworthy and you're inaccurately referencing information, you're cherry picking stats, you're using maybe a certain statistic and you're quoting it from that piece of evidence, but you're not doing it in an honest or accurate way. So hopefully that helped explain a bit about what we're looking at as far as the way that the evidence can be used to help drive the discussion. So in the example where we talked about vaccines, if we go through and the community reviews 100 or 1,000 different studies to do with vaccines and the safety of various ingredients, the goal is to see where the science is 100% settled. And then the goal is to see also where maybe either we just don't have the science or the evidence available, and you have to go out and find it and say, okay, people say that this certain ingredient is or isn't safe. Where's the science to back up that claim? Then you end up with a library of the claims that are or that do and don't have a good amount of supporting information, which then points to either one side being sort of clearly more right than the other, or we might just need that more information is needed. Either we have to go and find those scientific studies so that the community can review them. And if no studies have been done, then, that's another story where we'd have to go out and look at how do we get those studies made so that we can review them and make sure that we're looking at what needs to be looked at. So I think that is probably good for this session. Gives a bit more information about the discussion tool. This is something that idea of being able to review the evidence and have it sort of support a claim, which then boils up to the top, showing you which side has the best evidence and the best sort of use, the highest quality, the things that experts agree on. That same idea will be used all across Wikilection, whereas we're talking about what a politician did or didn't do or did or didn't say. The same idea of reviewing that evidence of what they said or didn't say, or how they voted or didn't vote. Again, having that sort of boil up to the individual person so that we can use that same roll up for how the evidence for a certain controversial topic, how the evidence skews what one way or the other. The goal is to use that same type of system to be able to roll up the information for a person or an event, or as we start talking about things like politicians and how they voted in the past and what they say is going to happen if a certain piece of legislation is or isn't passed, for that to be evidence-based as well. So as we've said in the first video, where everything is evidence-based, you start to be able to answer things like, well, if the science that we're seeing is based on evidence, we should be able to lay that all out and start to be able to answer specific questions about a certain topic, like which ingredients in vaccines have been proven safe. For example, you can see all the underlying evidence to support that claim. So we can stop rehashing the same battles. If somebody in California has, definitively proven something is or isn't safe, we don't have to have that same conversation again in New York, if that makes sense. So I think I will leave it there today. As we said earlier, we'll be revisiting this topic in probably, I guess, about 2 months. The goal is to have it be about a 2-month cycle as we revisit these same topics, where our goal is to have feedback from the audience, figure out maybe where things weren't clear, where things that like they may have been skipped over, or we need to solve a new problem that we didn't realize before. And then to rehash the same topic of the discussion tool once we have some feedback and maybe a bit more experience talking about it, that kind of thing. So thank you for watching. If you do have any questions, feel free to either leave a comment on this YouTube clip, or you can visit us on Facebook and or on our Patreon page. All those are watched. And the goal is not just this video, any of the videos. If you have some questions or concerns about how things work, feel free to reach out, because the whole purpose of this is to have the community and the audience involved in building the tool so that they feel that they can trust the results. Thank you for your time.